Thanks for listening to the Zain Battla podcast. We officially have merch, and right now 100% of the profits are going to PCRF, Palestine Children's Relief Fund. We got hoodies, we got t-shirts, and again, 100% of the profits going right to PCRF. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I want to thank you for supporting my work. Okay, tell us about how you hate small talk.
I hate it. Like, it feels like a waste of time, and I like to be efficient. And sometimes, like, when people go too much into the small talk, I don't know what to do. I just walk away. I just turn around and walk away.
So what's the difference between this and small talk?
This is small talk.
This is small talk?
No, it's not. It's deeper.
I was about to say, do you hate it here already? We're 1 minute in.
Less than 1 minute.
Less than 1 minute
20 seconds in. Yeah. No, I don't hate it. This is kind of entertaining, but small talk is like pleasantries. And no one says what they mean. They're like, how are you? Good. Alhamdulillah. No one's good right now.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I think even before, there's kind of this culture of you see someone, even if you don't know them, stranger in the office, wherever, you just say, hey, how are you? Okay, I'm probably never going to see you again. Do I really need to respond with how I'm doing? Or it's almost a greeting now that.
Or like, we should hang out. Or have you been? Okay, I need to turn this off. My phone is ringing. I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
This is it's gonna be cut, or you can leave it, whatever.
We can leave it in. It's more natural.
Candid?
More candid.
Yeah.
It's not small talk.
It'd be really candid if I answered the phone, had a whole ass conversation.
Do it.
No.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway.
Back to hating on small talk.
Yeah. So I think it's an American thing. I think it's like a Western culture thing to have so much small talk, because every time I travel, I notice that like people are just very straight to the point. They are not smiling when they're saying things, but they're very kind. In America, we like smile when we say things, but when I travel, I get feedback from other people who are there, who are like, they say things like, oh, you Americans always say things like, let's hang out soon, or it's been a long time, how have you been, where have you been, but you don't mean it. So they've given me that feedback for like, this is our experience with Americans. And then I notice that more now since that's, been brought to my conscious.
I do think that sometimes there is that sense of small talk in the more foreign realm. I do have family that, are in Pakistan. I don't talk to them as much, but when I do talk to them, I don't know what to talk to them about, but I know I have to. So you're talking to them on FaceTime, not knowing what to talk about, and then it just becomes into that same small talk. But I guess it's different with the sense of, I'm small talking with family versus I'm small talking with a stranger or someone that I'm very distant with that I just ran into. Oh, hey, I haven't seen you in a long time. How you been? Blah, blah, blah. Oh, we should hang out. But it's kind of fake at the end of the day.
But with family, don't you think like we actually care when we're asking them for like a dadi or nani, it's like, how's your health? That's usually the small talk. Right. Or like with an uncle, how's it going? But we actually care about the response. Like, I feel like when I ask a family member, like, how's it going? They don't give me like an expected stereotype textbook answer. They don't say fine, right? They'll be like, my knee's hurting, my arthritis is bad. They give me all the info. Yeah. And sometimes it's overwhelming for us because we're used to just getting the, like, I didn't want a real answer thing from our Americanization.
Yeah, I'm fine. No, I'm not fine. Here's all of my problems. And since you're family, I'm going to tell you this. So even if it's small talk, it's genuine small talk. So in your criticism of small talk, it's more so the fake small talk, not the genuine small talk. You enjoy the genuine small talk, which is why you're here, unless this isn't genuine.
It's not small talk. I don't know. Maybe my definition of small talk needs to maybe we need to rethink about, what small talk means. Because if it's genuine, is it small talk? I don't know.
I don't know. Do you feel, diving into your professional life, do you feel that talk. Exactly. So
it's deeper, right?
I
think anything vulnerable is not small talk. So maybe my definition of small talk is very, very narrow.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what it is that you do, Kinza? I know maybe in your field there is a little bit of small talk here and there, but then it may dive into a bit of a deeper realm than just small talk.
Yeah, good point, because it does get very deep very quick in my field. So I have been working as an attorney for almost 10 years, and I do work in nonprofit organizations, which is for low-income victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, and trafficking. Right now, I'm working at a place that does primarily sexual assault and trafficking, and civil and criminal. And then in the past, I've done work in domestic violence and family law, as well as civil rights and immigration a little bit as well. And so before, yeah, actually, no, the whole time, like in my entire career, it's been, the small talk has been very limited, and we go straight to like very deep personal things, and it can be very intimate, especially compared to other areas of law, because we're learning about someone's like personal life, intimate life with their partner or with an ex, or about their sexual assault. It's a very personal thing, and so it is very important for us to make the other person feel comfortable, like the client feel comfortable telling us about these things, and to gain their trust, because it's a very difficult thing to do. Because when someone talks to like a lawyer or a psychologist or a doctor about something so personal, it's kind of awkward because it's very one-sided. Like the service provider knows so much more about them than this person knows about the service provider. So it's very difficult to do. I can empathize with them, and so it is important for us to make them feel comfortable, and as much as we can at least, and gain some trust so that they feel okay telling us about these details. And I don't know if small talk's the best way to do that. I do think like body language helps a lot, tone helps a lot. And sometimes they'll say something, or they'll be afraid to tell me something, and I'm like, listen, like, no judgment, I've heard it all, like, no worries. And our tone and how we respond to someone when they tell us about something really does make a difference. Like, nothing phases me anymore, I think, because I've heard so many things. So if someone tells me about something crazy that they themselves did, I'm just like, oh, okay. And the fact that I'm not like, oh my God, what do you mean? I think they are automatically like, I'm okay, I can continue, and no one's freaking out anywhere, And so it is difficult to kind of create that safe space for someone, very genuinely, sincerely gain someone's trust, especially when they're talking about something so intimate and personal and vulnerable. But, it's part of the work, and I think we get better at it as we continue, just like in all fields.
It does seem in many avenues of law, the focus is always on financial or ownership of a business, because there's just this focus on capitalism. But when it comes to a individual perspective, whether it's someone who's in immigration or other avenues that are more people focused, more individual focused, such as yours, which is focusing on victims of domestic abuse, victims of domestic violence, whether they're married, whether they're in a relationship. So it just comes down to how are you able to address those needs of your clients, and especially thinking about myself being a member of the South Asian community. There's so many gray areas within our culture and our religious beliefs that, oh, this is abuse, this isn't abuse. Whereas if you looked at it from a more American lens, some of the things that we do are very clearly abuse. It's just something that's been passed down generationally to be normalized. So not just with the South Asian community, but also I'm sure you see a bit of variability with the Black community and with the white community, and what people from different socioeconomic statuses, what kind of abuse patterns do you see there? I mean, Chicago itself is just such a diverse city. I'm sure you see many different avenues of abuse, and how is it that you address those concerns of your clients?
No, exactly. And I thanks for bringing that up. It's such a good point, because there's a lack of attorneys or service providers generally in this area of to work to advocate on behalf of victims of domestic violence or sexual assault or any gender-based violence generally, not even just attorneys. I'm talking about any advocates, right? And so I work on the side. I work with this organization called Heart, and it's a nonprofit organization. I'm just one of their independent contractors, just on their team, but they do have a smaller core staff that kind of runs the organization, and they work on their nationwide nonprofit and work to advocate for Heart stands for Healing, Education, Advocacy, Research, and Training. And so doing all that on behalf of South Asians and Muslims around the US. And there's so much that has not been you know, it's like stuff that I and other South Asians have grown up without learning about. For example, we're just told don't date, right? But what about, okay, fine, but if you do, here's how to give consent. We don't talk about consent, right? Or we didn't in our generation. Now I think they're starting to a little bit more. But a lot of like sexual health, sexual violence topics were not discussed. And I think that that's why it's so important for our communities, so that we can start to counter all of those normalized norms, you know, that we have in our culture that in a different lens, or an illegal lens, I should say, not even American, because even in a lot of American cultures, things are seen as normal when they're actually abusive, in my opinion, based on what I've seen. From a legal lens would be abusive, right? Or from a moral lens would be, or even an Islamic lens would be abusive. And there's different types of abuse, right? As we know, there's financial abuse, which I see a lot in Desi and Arab cultures. There's emotional abuse, very common, in my opinion, way more, happens way more than people realize, I think. A lot of relationships that have power dynamics, I think there's an emotional abuse element going on there.
What would be an example of emotional abuse?
Gaslighting is one of the common, you know, it's a word that we're using more often now. Most people use it wrong in my, I think, like I'm seeing a lot of people use the term and I'm like, that's not how to use it. The word actually means making someone think that they're crazy, or making someone start questioning their own reality. And do you know where the word comes from? It's really interesting. There's a movie called Gaslight, it takes place in Chicago, back in a long time ago, whenever gas lamps were a thing, right? There was like a literal gaslight. And the husband of a couple was dimming the gaslight a little bit more every day. And the wife was like, it's getting darker, like the light is like less, right? And he was like, no, it's in your head. That's where the term gaslighting comes from. So that's the actual definition, is making someone question their own reality. But the person who is doing the gaslighting knows exactly what's going on. And so a lot of times when people say, and we see this in every level, we see it in government, we see it in politics, we see it in media, we see it, especially nowadays, we see it in domestic relationships, we see it in any abusive relationships, we see it in cults, in gangs, in a lot of, you know, any system, large or small, with power dynamics. Sometimes we gaslight ourselves when we start questioning our own instinct, and that's a result of being gaslit sometimes. Sometimes it's a result of just like not trusting ourselves enough, you know, things like that. But so an example of gaslighting would be like the light thing, like from the movie. But it would also be like when someone's like, oh, this didn't happen, it was in your head, you know? And it's hard to say sometimes because memory can change. Like memory is so, you know, and our memories can like be affected, you know? But it is hard to say sometimes, but sometimes it's pretty obvious, especially when there's a system of abuse with other types of abuse also going on. Emotional abuse almost always is present when there's another type of abuse going on: financial, physical, verbal, things like that.
So you said financial, you said emotional, and now you also mentioned physical and verbal?
Yeah, and there's more. There's sexual abuse, obviously. And most often, there are more than one present at the same time. When someone says, oh, I'm not a victim of domestic violence because I haven't been physically abused, that's the first stereotype that I want everyone, misconception, stereotype, whatever you want to call it, that I want everyone to learn, is just like, that's not the only form of abuse, because so many relationships that I've seen have verbal, or sometimes they do have physical abuse, but the person doesn't qualify it as physical abuse because the victim is either in denial, understandably, or they see it as a one-time thing, or like, oh, it's only because of his anger problems or something, right? But when someone sees it as coupled with, you know, the verbal or the emotional abuse, then they're more likely to kind of notice the severity of the situation and see how it's actually a domestic violence like pattern, you know.
And when it comes to physical abuse, is there some sort of range of variability when it comes to what a victim might consider physical abuse? So for example, if maybe a victim of abuse doesn't view a slap as abuse, but they'll view a punch as abuse, and if their significant other slaps them but doesn't punch them, they may view that as, oh, I'm not being abused, I'm just being disciplined. And maybe that's because of the way they were brought up, that historically, when they weren't being obedient to their parents, they faced, that level of abuse that has been normalized and conditioned in their brain. And then when they're seeing that repeated pattern as a significant other, that form of abuse, it's still normalized to them. So is there a lot of reprogramming that goes on with these clients that maybe don't recognize that they are being abused?
Yeah, that's a good point. There is a range, and actually, only after I started started practicing law in this field, I also learned that even throwing a table or a chair, or not a table, but throwing, over a table or pushing a table or throwing a chair or like punching a wall, even though it's not to the significant other, it still counts as physical abuse because the aim is to threaten. It's to intimidate the other person.
And it can always escalate too.
Exactly.
Right?
I always tell my friends or clients or whoever is dealing with any of this that when something is like at a level 2 or 3, it's going to escalate. Like it's just a natural progression of domestic violence. They slowly push boundaries, gain trust. It's not a haphazard thing. It's a very manipulative process. So people do start at level 1 and 2 and 3, which could be, I don't know, on one side of the spectrum, but it does increase. So I kind of tell a lot of my clients and or anyone I know who's going through this that like if it is at this level, unless there's intervention of some kind, which could be couples therapy, it could be individual therapy, it could be the person realizing what they're doing, it could be something about breaking the cycle because it's a cycle usually. Then unless there's that of some sort, it's gonna get worse probably. And I don't blame the victims. It's a lot of denial because, for someone to accept that like this was domestic violence or this is domestic violence or this is physical abuse also means accepting their own decision that I'm choosing to be with someone who is doing this to me. So it's very difficult. I don't blame the people who are victims or survivors. The names I use them interchangeably because victim is still used in the legal world. Survivor is more used socially now and stuff like that. And so I don't blame them for having a hard time accepting it because our society is one that puts a lot of blame on the victim. There's a victim blaming in our society, right? A lot of, even police officers, even now, even in court, even state's attorneys, even in criminal cases, even judges, I've heard them say, but why didn't you leave then? Why didn't you call the police then, And it's interesting when you mentioned BIPOC communities and South Asians, for example. I've had Muslim female clients or Black female clients that have said, I have not called the police on my significant other or my partner when there was abuse because I don't trust what the police will do to my Black boyfriend, which understandable. But to have to make that decision in the first place, right? To have to, while you're in the situation, which is very difficult and, people are not fully themselves. You end up losing yourself when you're a victim of psychological abuse. But then even during that very vulnerable, terrible state, they have to like make these decisions because of our societal issues. Like that's insane, right? And they do. And for a lot of people, that's why they're not calling the police, They're like, okay, yeah, he's abusing me, but I don't want him dead either. Like he's still, my child's parent, or he's still someone I've cared about in the past or whatever it may be. So they just don't trust the police or the system. I've had Muslim clients tell me, I'm scared to tell non-Muslim people about this abusive relationship because they're gonna think that just because he's a Muslim man, now he's gonna make Muslims look bad, I'm like, that sucks that we have to think about that, Think about the stereotype of the abused Muslim woman and the abuser of a Muslim man, which is like a terrible stereotype, but people also don't wanna feed it, but you're also caught in a conundrum oftentimes because of that, right? So.
Because when it comes to Muslims, for example, there's this Western narrative of women being oppressed, men being abusive. So I want to say it makes sense when a Muslim woman might withhold her reporting that she's being abused. And we just need to do better as a society to be able to allow these victims to come out. And I'm not saying anything is flawed in the logic of withholding that they are being abused, but I can see why someone who is being abused, whether they're Muslim, whether they're non-Muslim, whether they're, you know, a member of the Black community or another minority or marginalized group, that they don't want to feed into these narrative that, you know, their women behave a certain way, their men are abusive and violent. I can see why you know, a victim may withhold that to prevent those stereotypes from being proven as true in the court of public opinion.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's one of the many barriers to reporting, right? So people don't expose. You know, I didn't realize how common this was in our communities until I started doing this work, because people hear about like a Muslim attorney who deals with this stuff, and they want to go to a Muslim person because they want someone to not project those stereotypes on them, right? Or have their opinion on Islam change, but also who understands, like, I mean, for divorce cases, mahar, for example, child support, custody, like all the Islamic parts of this, right? So people will reach out to me, and there were some, like 2020, you know, and 2021, for example, there were these years, it was like once a week that I was getting reached out to by somebody, either a friend's sibling, a friend's parent, a friend's friend, right? And people would just find my name and like reach out being like, I need help, right? And I didn't realize how prevalent it was in our community until I started being the person that people talk to about this, right? And we have these stereotypes that we have an image of a abused person in our heads, right? Which is like someone who is like maybe an immigrant, maybe doesn't know English, maybe is less educated, maybe is more naive or vulnerable that way. And that's like not the case, right? There are people who, there are times where I've been talking to someone and I'm like, I'm just like you. Like I cannot, I'm like, I see myself in them, I see them in me, and I'm just like, what is like the difference? Like what are the chances that they ended up in this situation, right? And it's because abuse is very manipulative, right? It's very, it's done very methodically. People know what they're doing oftentimes. And if they don't intend on it outright, eventually it becomes negligence. Like it becomes like, okay, I'm aware of the effects, but I'm not doing anything to change it, right? I didn't intend for it to be this bad, but now I've seen that it has gotten bad, right? But I'm not doing anything to change it. So it's interesting because I think, yeah, because of that, a lot of people are just like stuck in these situations and in these cycles of abuse. But yeah, there are so many people. We don't realize how prevalent it is in all of the communities. And people always say it's worse. Like my Muslim friends will say it's worse in the Muslim community. My, you know, Latinx friends will say it's worse in that community. Like having worked with a lot of communities, it's literally the same. Like I always say, like, it's not a Muslim problem. Everyone's like, oh, well, Desis, we have a lot of that, right? Yes, if we're in the Desi community, we see it more in the Desi community, right? But when I was working in Kane County, where it's all white and Latinx people, all my cases were white and Latinx, and it happens in those communities just as much. I had just as many clients. There's just as many problems. There is a difference in the tools that are used to abuse, like alcoholism and you know, versus like immigration status, like so depending on the different communities. So there are differences in what tools abusers use in order to exercise power and control. But the fact that abuse is happening is the same all across the board, unfortunately.
Probably someone who isn't as exposed to abuse or dealing with clients that are victims of abuse, maybe to them it sounds, you know, very frightening upfront, as it should. It, you know, can startle anybody hearing this story or this abuse has been going on. But for you, because, you know, this is essentially your day job, and, you know, you deal with clients that are consistently, maybe it's a long-term abuse, maybe it's short-term abuse, because you've been facing this for, you said 10 years now?
Mm-hmm, almost 10 years.
Almost 10 years. So it's just like, I almost imagine you just maybe in the beginning just trying to take it all in and being very moved by a lot of these stories. And not saying that you don't get moved by them now, but more so that it's like, okay, I'm literally in the world of where all this is happening. Mm-hmm. So to me, you know, a crazy story, what may be a crazy abuse story to me might just be a regular day for you.
Yeah, maybe that's a good distinction too between like whether it phases, like it still phases me the same, but my expression of it might be different. So in the beginning, I was getting, actually, this is interesting that you brought this up because I didn't think about this before. But in the beginning of my career, my impression was I have to not show any emotion, I have to not show any care, I have to put all that aside because they're the ones who get to feel anything and I don't. I have to be strong, you know. It's like this like it's a misconception, I think. Now, it does faze me, you know, and I do care. And oftentimes when they tell me how something was done to them, my expression of it is like, oh God, like, and I do take a pause sometimes, or I do take a break sometimes, or I have like a sigh or an exhale or something like, you know, that just shows the impact it's having on me. And I think, evolved to realize that it's okay to show that kind of emotion to your client because then it's almost validating of their emotion, right? And if I was telling someone something horrific that happened to me, I wouldn't want them to just be like stone cold, like, you know, still faced, because it's weird to be giving so much and have no feedback, you know, and body language, tone, expressions, like all that goes a long way. So if I felt like someone was hearing me and was impacted by what I was saying, but not judging me for it, I think that would be more inviting and help me trust them more. And so even with my clients, I do kind of like give a little bit of feedback, but when they're telling me something that they did, a lot of times, you know, my clients feel shame at being in a place of, in that situation to begin with. You know, my clients feel shame at dating somebody who is doing this to them to begin with, you know, understandably, but I don't want them to feel shame, right? It's not their fault, but we have a victim blaming culture in our society. And so a lot of people will blame themselves as well. And so when they say things that they did themselves, or like, yeah, if I did go over to their place, or I did go back to this relationship after this incident, I'm like, okay, that's where I don't show much of like, oh my God, how could you? Like, I'm not gonna do that because I understand the complexity and the intricacies that are involved with these type of relationships and how, you know, the psychological abuse that happens and the impact of that being that it makes it hard for the victim to leave, for example. So I'm not going to show so much of a reaction there as I would if something's happening to them, for example. So that took me a long time to learn, and I'm still learning it. And it's one of those things that people kind of, as a service provider is in their field, I'm sure that I'm not the only one. I'm sure nurses, doctors, psychologists are all kind of, they have their own process of how to go about that. But yeah, it is an interesting, like, you know, it's kind of trippy to think about it.
And you were mentioning earlier about the patriarchal structure of abuse, and I'm pretty sure that, you know, not even being an expert in abuse or in the field, that majority of the victims are women. But are there male victims that you do encounter, or what's the kind of ratio that maybe you see, or maybe there's a statistic nationally of this percentage of abuse victims are women, this is the percentage of men?
Mm-hmm. It is like mostly women, like mostly women who are the victims of abuse. And it's because in our society, we have an innate power dynamic where men have more power than women. And that's, you know, evidenced by our like wages and a bunch of other history, just all of it. And so women are primarily the victims, but I've had male clients who are being victimized by a female identifying person. And I've had male identifying clients who have been victimized by another male identifying. So in a gay relationship, for example, and there have been women who are victimized by male or female as well. There's also not just intimate partner violence. There can be violence, like domestic violence encompasses all household members. It could be siblings to sibling, parent to child, child to parent. I've seen all of those situations as well. They've been very sad to see, very eye-opening, and it definitely does happen.
It sounds like a very mentally debilitating job.
Just stressful.
Okay.
Yeah. It's not debilitating.
Well, the thing is, like, I guess maybe not mentally debilitating, but I was just
very dramatic. That's why I'm
dramatic.
At
Yeah,
you.
no, I agree.
I'm
but
just laughing.
It's more so from the perspective of, wow, I don't think I could be in your shoes.
Okay.
Because of, not dealing with, but, oh, is it recording right
It's
now?
definitely recording. You should have all of this in there.
Okay, all right.
All of this should be in there. Okay, it is stressful. But when people say, I don't know if I could ever do what you do, I think the same way about doctors. Like, I can't handle blood and gory stuff, right? It makes me grossed out or like nauseous or something. So it's like, I feel the same way about doctors and nurses, and PAs and all the people who work in healthcare, honestly. I feel the same way about psychologists. Oh my God, I have no patience for people crying to me in our legal sessions, because sometimes they blur the lines between therapist and lawyer when it's about something like this, so personal and intimate, and so I do not have that kind of patience. So I think everyone has whatever gift, skill we're given to by God, and is our like purpose. Like it's on us to use that skill or gift or privilege that we're given in a way that like serves people and worships God as a result. That's my opinion. So I don't think that anything I'm doing is exceptional. I think that this was, alhamdulillah, like I feel like God gave me a certain set of privileges, skills, whatever, like life, resources that I can then use to like do what I need to, right, for betterment of humanity. And I think everyone has something. I do think everyone has something. So yeah, sorry, that was a caveat tangent from when you said, I don't know if I could do what you do.
No, I mean, I really, truly don't think I could do what you do, just because, certain things like even seeing blood. I have this Band-Aid on my thumb.
I always have a Band-Aid on my thumb.
It's quite embarrassing. I was doing the dishes and there was a knife in there and I grabbed it and then it literally sliced my finger. And I don't do well with blood. I start seeing blood on other people or on me especially. I start getting lightheaded, feel like I'm gonna pass out. So yeah, I had to deal with that. So I already knew that,
I'm
because
sorry
of
for your experience.
no, it's okay.
You're okay now.
I'm okay. I'm doing great. But when it comes to, the medical field, I knew, for instance, that wasn't for me because, at a young age, especially in a Desi household, it's pushed, oh, you're going to be a doctor, right? But the way I deal with blood, I just knew I could not do it. And it wasn't even like that the science part didn't fascinate me or didn't, because I still like have a very high level of interest towards science and about topics such as, the legal space and what happens there. But I just know that, just one example, I wasn't built to handle blood. I was
Stop saying blood. We both can't handle blood, and we're talking about blood.
More so built to just have these kinds of conversations. What is it that you do to kind of relieve the tension from, stress at work or stress with any of your other endeavors that you pursue, like with your nonprofit organization, or you also teach at DePaul, right?
Yeah, I'm an adjunct there. I teach legal writing some semesters. I'm not teaching right now because I started a new job in June, so I wanted to not teach this semester. But some semesters, for a few years now, I've been teaching legal writing there. And that's been really fun. I do like teaching a lot. And legal writing feels so different than, I love editing and writing. I'm like a nerd when it comes to editing things and writing and research and all that stuff. So, and I teach students how to do oral arguments and things like that. So that part's really fun for me. And so I do enjoy teaching. I keep that. It does help to have a well-rounded, all my legal work is split between representing clients, going to court, litigation, all that stuff at work where I'm dealing with assault and trafficking and domestic violence kind of cases. But then on this other side, I have the, the legal writing class, which is so different. Our topics that we're talking about are not necessarily this, right? What we're writing our papers about, what I'm teaching them to do oral arguments about are often not about these topics, right? So that's nice. And then I think everyone needs to have some creative outlet. Anyone whose day job and main field is not creative, I think everyone has some creative gift. That's my personal belief. Alhamdulillah, in my family, my mom is very artsy. We have paintings, of hers from when she was in her 20s. And my dad and his whole side of the family plays a lot of instruments. My grandfather was a poet. And so we have a lot of art in my family, which I believe is a very big part of Islamic tradition and in like South Asian culture, and something that we don't necessarily always own or like keep up, you know, but I do think that it's a big part of, at least in my family. And so for me, right now I am doing photography on the side, and I really enjoy it because primarily it keeps me very present. A good way for anyone who I think is in their head a lot, like me, I'm very analytical, I'm in my head a lot. I'm always like thinking about things. In order for people to get out of their head, I think photography is a great thing to try, just because it forces you to be present and in your surroundings. And I've noticed no matter what kind, you know, right now outside in Chicago is kind of snowstorming slash slush slash rain. It's like a weird weather that we have right now. But if I were to take a walk with my camera, or just with an intention of taking photos, even if it's my phone, I'd be a lot more present and find beauty in today's weather, even though it's so gross out. But like for me, it helps me see beauty in everywhere I am, you know? And so that's been a really nice way for me to like de-stress as well. And then also like traveling is something I do a lot, as much as I can. Thankfully, I've been able to do that, you know, and that's the best thing about working and not being in school, is that when you're off, like weekends and, you know, evenings, you're actually off, you know, at least weekends. And then I do a lot of books. I'm reading a lot of books as well.
You could essentially combine all your passions in one trip. For example, oh, I'm traveling and I'm going to take photos, but then even on the plane ride, I can read a book. Or
oh, I am soon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, do you want to hear about that? So I actually, when you said that, I got reminded. So the American Bar Association invited me to be like an international judge to go to Lahore, Pakistan, which I've never been to Lahore. I've always go to Karachi, and I've been to Islamabad and northern Pakistan in the mountains. So I'm really excited to go to Lahore. And basically, I'm going to be a international like arbitration judge or something, and they have a nationwide moot court competition where all these law students across different like places in Pakistan are they're doing this huge moot court project thing about women's rights in Pakistan and marriage. And so they saw that I was someone who had done some work in like Pakistani and Muslim women's rights. And in law school as well, I went to Geneva, to the United Nations there, and observed like committee hearings for this like committee that I'll talk about more if you want me to. But in American Bar Association has this project called Rule of Law Initiative, and so they're going to send me to Lahore to do that. And I'm obsessed with like Pakistani history, Islamic history, and there's so much cool stuff there. So I really am planning on combining all these passions into one over there, taking my camera, reading on the way, like reading there, you know, and then while I'm there, also just see like these Pakistani law students talk about women's rights and marriage rights in Pakistan, which I don't know that much about, so I'm excited to learn about it.
That's awesome. It sounds that, you know, you're going to be a part of kind of this revolutionary movement happening in Pakistan as we speak, that, you know, women are, you know, having more rights. If they're in an abusive relationship, they have the ability to, you know, speak up more about it. So that sounds very exciting that you get to be a part of that. And then what's this UN? Is it like a conference, or is it a?
It was, so the United Nations, I was in a fellowship in law school. I went to DePaul for law school, and they have this International Human Rights Law Institute, which is Sharif Bassiouni. He is a Palestinian human rights lawyer. He basically started the International Criminal Court with some folks, but he is amazing. And so his International Human Rights Law Institute at DePaul Law School is his thing. He like created it. And so I went to DePaul Law School because of that institute. And while I was there for law school, so I think about 10 years ago or more, I was doing a fellowship in that institute. We call it yearly, which is like the letters. And it was about women's rights, but it was about the UN Convention on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. Very long name. It's abbreviated to CEDAW, CEDAW. And so the UN CEDAW had a committee hearing, which they have them all the time. And so they had these back in it was February 2012, 2013 or something. I went to the United Nations with the other fellow, a colleague of mine, and our yearly director. So us three went to Geneva to observe those committee hearings, and that was really cool.
Wow. No, I mean, the that sounds very exciting, and it sounds like you're really making a difference, not just on a local level here in Chicago, but I mean something as big as the UN's committee hearing. It sounds like even on a national, international scale, there is a place for you to make a difference. I guess to wrap things up, what lessons can we learn from our conversation today, that someone who's watching right now, how can they be a resource or an ally for people who are victims of abuse, or they know someone who is a victim of abuse? What would be the best resource, or how can they contact you if they want to, have you as a what's the word I'm looking for? Attorney
or just like if they need any help. Yeah. Good questions. So the first piece of advice I have for anybody listening is that you never know what people are going through. So if anyone confides in you for anything, if anyone reveals anything to you, like, you have to be mindful of your own judgments and not project that onto them. And the thing is, whenever someone reveals something to us, like, we are in a place of being trusted by them. So something I say to people often when they reveal something really intimate, personal, problematic, difficult, whatever it may be to me, is sometimes I'll say, like, thanks for trusting me with this information, because that takes a lot of courage, especially when it's something so difficult. Because look at our society, look at our whether it's Western American culture or Desi culture or whatever it may be, there's multiple layers of barriers that that we might face. So one of the biggest things I would suggest for people if they want to be an ally is to just be very empathetic, be more self-aware, so that you can be more aware about other people, and vice versa. Learn about other people, be curious about other people. But when someone ever discloses anything to you, be a safe space. Like, don't give a stupid response. Like, this is not the time to project your own, judgments. Like, if you have them, totally fine. Deal with them later. Like, this is not the time, right? Because basically we just don't want to make bad situations worse, or someone's trauma worse, right? And regarding access to resources, so Heart's website, I think it's called Heart to Grow is the name of the website, but just Google Heart to Grow. And they actually have a bunch of resources on their website. The one specific one that I would recommend is, and this is an American organization. So if someone's in Canada, there's other, NISA is one that's over there. No matter what country someone's in, there are resources and organizations like this now, I think. Sometimes they may not be Muslim, but they do exist now, thankfully, and they're starting to grow. I know ICNYU, Khaled Latif, and a couple other people have started a whole project there as well. I think it's called Pillars. And so they're doing great work there too. So anyway, so Heart's website has a bunch of resources. I think the tab is called Resources or something like that, or Education. And one of the resources they have is the Power and Control Wheel, which is specifically for Muslims. And that is really interesting because Power and Control Wheel is how we learn more about how people, what tools people use to abuse. We kind of talked about this a little bit earlier. Regarding, they also have the book called The Sex Talk, which just came out recently, maybe a year ago or something. And so I also recommend that, not just for women, but for men too, not just for young women or men, for older people too. Honestly, a lot of service providers can use it, chaplains, people who work at organizations that are community-based organizations should be able to at least lend it to someone who needs, that. Also, I think just looking up whatever organizations there's a National Domestic Violence organization. It's called National Domestic Violence Hotline, maybe, but it's like a full organization. Having those numbers available, or just knowing that they exist, so that if you ever need to give it to someone, you're able to do that. You know, the majority of the work that happens in communities like DC community, South Asian, Muslim, American, whatever, happens from people in one-on-one conversations, not from organizations like this. These organizations give the resources, they do some research, they do some advocacy efforts, but the way that we change a culture is through like one-on-one conversations, is through changing our tone when we talk about these things. It's being able to talk about these things openly. It's being able to share our experiences or normalize these kinds of things so that people can talk about these things in a safe space, in a safe way. So a lot of the people I've seen do the best work in these are not service providers like me or other lawyers or anyone. It's like the people who, you know, that mom who's like the neighborhood mom, you know, who's like everybody's mom, and everyone goes to her with all their things, and she's a reliable source. She doesn't judge anyone. Those are the people that we should all strive to be, you know, and we can do that in any capacity. We don't have to be in this field. We don't have to be an expert at anything specific. Sorry, that was a long answer, but my email address, if anyone wants to reach me, is kinzakhanjd@gmail.com. They can reach me that way. Or on Heart's website, you can also do ask a, there's a team. Like on there's like a virtual, I don't know what we're called, virtual educators or something, like there's like a way that you can ask someone questions. So there's another attorney on that website. If you know me personally and you don't want to ask me about your personal situation, you can totally ask somebody else if it's easier for this other person does not live in Chicago or Illinois. So if someone wants to ask someone who's in a different state who they don't know personally, that's totally understandable. There's a guy on there if someone wants to ask a male, you know. There's another female on there who is a social worker. So if someone has a question for a social worker and not a lawyer, for example, then there's a form on there where you could just anonymously submit your question. It gets emailed to the person. So if you select my name, it'll get emailed to me, but you don't have to. And then we respond. So Heart has like a system for that. But obviously anyone can also reach out to me directly too. That's totally fine.
No, and I appreciate you giving that. Hopefully, anyone watching doesn't have the need to reach out to you because, they're not facing abuse directly or someone they know is. But it's glad that, the resources are out there. Mm-hmm. And thank you for coming on today and talking about, your field and the taboos around discussing abuse. And I think we had a really good conversation. Thank you for coming, Kinza.
Thank you.